Hey, thank you so much for coming. When I got up this morning, I was low-key worried that we were going to not have a very good turnout and we'll have gotten a different venue and just had like a little crowd, and then it got to the point where I was like, gosh, I hope nobody else turns up. So this is really great. It's really nice to have like a mix of CMC and NZAC members here, so thanks for coming to join in on our CMC Club night, a very special CMC Club night. If you don't know me, my name is Kira. I do the club nights for the Canterbury Mountaineering Club. And I don't have any major notices today. And I'm going to try and wrap it up real quick so we can move on. But I did want to remind everyone that this is our centennial year, so the club is turning 100 this year, which is really exciting. We have a whole different bunch of events that are happening this year, and we are going to have a calendar coming out really soon for that stuff, so make sure you keep your eyes peeled to your email inboxes and our Facebook, and we're also going to have a book launch with the book that is just getting wrapped up, which is going to be all about the history of the club, which is super exciting. Let me check that I've covered off my stuff. I was getting really nervous as everyone was filing in, and I was like, okay, 40 people is good, but 100 and plus some is a little bit more nerve-wracking. When it was first put to the committee that I was going to try and get Nathan to speak, there was somebody who was very dubious about whether or not I could make that happen. And I think if you've been following what Nathan's been up to and all the different kind of appearances that he's been doing, I think you'll see that he's somebody who's like really eager to give back to the community and share his story and share his experience, and I just think that's a really cool thing. And I'm not going to introduce anything else because I'm sure it's going to be totally covered, so please welcome Nathan Longhurst.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Kara, and thanks to both the CMC and NZAC for having me tonight. Yeah, I'm Nathan, and I'm really excited to share some stories about taking on the 100 Peaks Challenge this summer. So to start with, I'd just like to give some background about myself. I'm from Spokane, Washington, in the western US. I feel really grateful to have grown up in a big family doing lots of stuff outdoors. So I grew up skiing and backpacking and just spending time in the wilderness with my family. As I got older and got some more independence, I started doing some more rock climbing and trail running and venturing out deeper into the backcountry, mostly in the Northwest, especially in the Cascade Mountains. My sort of first big continuous mountaineering link-up style effort was there in the North Cascades with my good friend Jason Hardrath. Together we did the Bulgers 100 list, which is an unofficial list of the 100 highest peaks in Washington state, mostly concentrated in the North Cascades. This was sort of Jason's baby, Jason's project that he sort of planned all the logistics for and then sort of took me on as a mentee, and I learned a lot from him that summer. We were the first two people to do this list in a season. He did it in 50 days, and I finished up in a little bit longer than that. I was really kind of taken and excited about this approach of taking this whole list of peaks and approaching it with more of a like a through hiker perspective of just climbing peak after peak, day after day for a long continuous push. And so the next summer, I put together my own project with a similar sort of framing, which was the Sierra Peaks section list. Unlike the Bulgers list, this one was a hand-picked selection of peaks. It wasn't based on any height or prominence or any hard numbers. Rather, it was put together by the Sierra Club based on the aesthetics of some of these mountains or the geographical or cultural significance or interesting climbing routes. So they chose these peaks to represent a diverse set of peaks throughout the Sierra Nevada range in California. And with my good friend Travis Soares, we did all of those in about 4 months, which is the first time that list had been done in a season, and just had a really wonderful time sort of exploring the mountains of California and doing some excellent climbing on warm, sunny California granite. My next sort of big expedition style foray was my first trip into one of the greater ranges, into the Alaska range. I visited Denali in May of 2023 and spent about 3 weeks on the mountain, and in that time summited the mountain twice, first via the standard West Buttress route, and then second via the Cassin Ridge. The Cassin is a massive and very, very classic alpine route, mostly moderate technical difficulty, but just because of its scale, it's certainly one of the classic alpine routes of North America and frankly of the world. So I had an excellent time on that. Sort of the next piece of the puzzle that led to eventually what I ended up being able to do this summer was learning to paraglide, which I did in Utah of summer 2023. That was mainly concentrated around Salt Lake in the first few months of my flying. That's where I took my course and did my first flights. And this is a little clip of me doing my first ever sort of higher altitude mountain launch. And I knew from pretty much before I'd even started flying that I wanted to focus specifically on the hike and fly and climb and fly disciplines. A lot of more conventional paragliding is based on flying a large wing and often just launching from a car access site or lift access and using the size of your wing and rising air called thermals to climb up and cover distance. Hike and fly and climb and fly differ from that in that you're using a smaller, lightweight wing and then ascending using your own power and then just flying back to the base of the mountain. So then in March of 2024, I visited New Zealand for the first time and immediately fell in love. I was still fairly new in my climbing career, but was able to fly off some really spectacular peaks and just became familiarized with the beautiful mountains here. This is a clip of me launching off just below the summit of Mount Aspiring on that trip. And yeah, I was really impressed with the potential of the mountains here for this climb and fly discipline because of the extreme vertical relief and the steepness of these mountains, and was also just really taken with the natural beauty and aesthetics of the mountains here. And at the end of that trip, I was only here for about 3 weeks, and at the end of that trip, I already knew that I wanted to come back, and I was already sort of scheming a bigger project here. So I spent the North American summer mostly working, and in between my guiding trips, I was sort of scheming and researching and thinking what I could put together for a big project back here in New Zealand. And I took inspiration from several sources, including the really impressive 3,000 meter peaks enchainment that Alistair McDowell and Hamish Fleming did. They put together a really good video that I've probably watched dozens of times now. And yeah, I knew that I wanted to do some similar link up. And then as I continued to do more research, came across an article about Mr. Don French completing this 100 Peaks challenge. And I'd never heard of the list before, but of course, as you know, someone who's really sort of obsessed with these peak lists, I was instantly curious and wanted to learn more. So I did some more digging, and yeah, I found out about this 100 Peaks challenge list. It was put together by the New Zealand Alpine Club in 1991. That was to commemorate their centennial year, and so they sort of handpicked these 100 peaks that would represent the diversity of the mountains of New Zealand, similar to the SPS list, which I'd done previously. It's not based on any height or prominence, but rather just a hand-selected set of peaks based on aesthetics and diversity. And it's a really incredible list that includes peaks from all over the country, both islands, different ranges, and just a really diverse set of mountains. So I set to planning, plotted out all these peaks on a map, and sort of as I entered the earliest stage of planning, depending on the day, I would alternate back and forth between like, oh yeah, this is totally possible, this is going to be straightforward, to being just completely overwhelmed and like, wow, there's no way, this is totally impossible, this is insane. But yeah, so over the course of several months and many, many hours of staring at a map and reading trip reports and different route descriptions, sort of untangled this mess of peaks and plotted out different approach options, different climbing routes, and maybe the most challenging bit was planning out different flight possibilities from each of these summits. And so yeah, my whole map, this is just a little slice of the map, but it all kind of looked like this big scribble ball of all these different routes. But this, by comparison, is what it ended up looking like. So this is my actual GPS tracks from the project. The brown lines represent foot travel, and the blue ones represent flights. And if anybody is curious and wants to see sort of my whole set of tracks, they're available still on this website, 100peaks.nz. So once I had the map all planned out, I set to some final preparations. This picture is from me unpacking the van, which I live in up in the US. and sort of separating all of my belongings to the things that were coming with me and the things that weren't. So in this photo, everything on the left is what I brought with, and everything on the right is what I left, and that's probably 80% of my material possessions. But yeah, so then I hopped on a plane, flew halfway around the world, and yeah, this picture is flying over the, you can see the neves there in the high Alps, and flew on a spectacular day, and it was really, really an exciting flight to be able to look down at these mountains, which I hadn't really been in before, but I'd spent so many hours staring out on a map that I could pick them all out by name. And it was yeah, that flight, it was quite daunting looking down at all these steep snowy mountains, knowing what I was going to try to do. So the final bits of preparation, I flew in, I had a couple of food caches flown in to some of the high alpine huts. I had 3 caches flown in to Plateau, Pioneer, and Tasman saddle huts. An aside on sort of my aesthetics and my style for this project, that was the only time that I used a helicopter, and I didn't ride in it myself. So otherwise, I chose to do all of my travel either human-powered or by 2-wheel drive van. So this is a little clip of one of those caches on the way into Tasman saddle hut. But yeah, so all of my travel was in this trusty van, which I nicknamed Tiny Van, and mostly was sticking to 2-wheel drive tracks, but occasionally stretched that rule a little bit. But inevitably ended up needing some assistance when rallying the little 2-wheel drive van. So yeah, more often on some of these long Canterbury River valleys, I was using a mountain bike for approach, or just approaching on foot. I also had the opportunity to use a sea kayak on a couple of the approaches, which was fantastic, specifically on Milford Sound and Lake Taionu. And yeah, some of that paddling was just really, really gorgeous, and some of my favorite memories of the summer. The lakes provided a great avenue for efficient travel, but more often in some of these river valleys, the moving water was a little bit more of a challenge than a help. So yeah, especially in the early season, I had many challenging sections of crossing rivers that were, a little bit too deep to cross, or not being able to do so, and as was the case here, doing some heinous scrambling and bush bashing to get past the banks. And then, of course, because it is New Zealand, many hours of deep, dense bush bashing. There were a few rare occasions that I enjoyed some fantastic trail, which was always appreciated.
I enjoyed some actual, genuine, maintained, single trail.
So yeah, whenever that happened, I was really excited about it. Yes, so then moving up higher on the mountains, I started in November, which was still early season conditions, and was doing a lot of my climbing on some steep snow and ice. This clip was topping out the crux climbing on Mount Burns at the head of Mueller Glacier. And then probably one of the best early season climbs that I did was on the south face of Mount Hicks, which was fantastic ice climbing. As I moved later into the summer, the icy conditions started to melt out, and I got to do more of maybe my favorite style of alpine travel, which is just dry, sunny rock climbing. But of course, it is New Zealand, and as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, it was more often
Sketchy mud dirt mega chalk portion.
oh yeah, a little bit more like this. I learned on quite a few peaks actually the hard way why many of the high peaks here are climbed only in early season conditions. But then, of course, getting up high on the peaks, it always gave way to beautiful ridges and fantastic vistas. This is high on Mount Christina in the Darrens, which is maybe my favorite section of mountains here. And then, yeah, enjoyed some really, really fantastic summits.
Beauty, beauty, beauty. What an amazing place. Stoked.
So on many of these peaks, when the conditions allowed and the terrain was right for it, I was able to use a mini wing, a small paraglider, and fly off the top of some of them. So this is launching off the top of Mount Sefton on the last day of the project. This is my 99th peak. Sometimes the launches were straightforward, such as that one, but more often the conditions were a little bit more difficult. Often it was because of high wind. This is Maori Peak at the head of the Dark Glacier. You can see Mount Aspiring in the background on the left. There was enough wind in this instance so that I was actually able to soar the mechanical lift flying back and forth on this rising column of air above this peak for 15 minutes or so. Especially later in the season, many of the summits were quite rocky and didn't have snow to launch off of. And when that was the case, I used a technique called a throw and go, which basically the rule there is to just not let the wing touch the ground. This is Mount Rolliston, just above Arthur's Pass. Once I was flying, most often I would just glide in a relatively straight line towards wherever I was trying to go, whether that was back out to the car park or as far down the valley as I could get. On a few occasions, though, when the conditions and terrain and plan for the day all lined up, I was able to do a little bit more dynamic flying and flying close to the terrain, which is my personal favorite style. For flying, depending on where I was, if I wasn't too deep in the backcountry, sometimes I would be able to glide out and land right at the car park. Other times I would be landing in more remote riverbeds and then walking the rest of my way out if I couldn't glide all the way out to the car. And on some occasions, I was actually landing up high in the peaks and continuing to link up to other summits. So on this one, for example, this was also on the last day. I had launched off the top of Mount Sefton. I had descended down to this hanging glacier on the north shoulder of the footstool and was able to land here and only had to climb a few hundred more meters to reach the summit of footstool.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We lived.
Landing up high in the mountains like that is always a pretty wild feeling. Yeah, so I put together a little clip here to sort of showcase how all these different modes of travel fit together on any given day of the project. This was Mount Luffnon, which is at the head of the Godley Valley. It's a little bit of a logistically difficult peak and doesn't get climbed that often because of that. Don French told me that he thinks this peak has seen less than 10 total ascents. The difficulties come from the fact that the approach from the west coast is quite long and rugged, but approaching it from the east coast has several difficulties mostly related to the rapid glacial recession. So there's a terminal lake with steep, loose moraine walls that can be quite difficult and dangerous to traverse, and even once you get past the lake, there's a steep ice fall on the glacier that, depending on the conditions, may or may not even be passable. And so I sort of, and so I was able to use the wing to do a little bit of creative route finding to bypass these.
Sunrise, going up panorama. I just fell in the Godley River and I'm very wet and very cold and very pissed off. Holy morning, but it's so freaking freezing cold. So I'm going up the South Ridge of Panorama here, up on top of Panorama, aptly named. Look at this panorama. Wow. A little bit worried about this early cloud development. Could be an issue later on today. And there's Luffnon looking big and scary out there. Yeah, so here's the ice fall. The reason that we're up here is to bypass this, which I think was probably a good idea because it looks pretty gnar. So, I'm gonna pop a quick flight here and really hope that we make glider to that flat bit above the ice fall. And then go climb Luffnon and then hopefully fly off Luffnon all the way out and not end up in a lake. That'll work. We will take it. Cruising on up the Great Glacier. Oh, here it is. Freaking Digashrund. Like, how does snow even do this? The rock actually looks like okay-ish. So I think I might try to scramble up and around. Past the Paddy Shrund, now up the snow cooler. On the ridge, Santa Cooley, slightly alpine, tropinism for the win. Oh yeah, mountains, yeah. Summit of Luffnon, the clouds are packing in, the wind is perfect. We're gonna boogie, boogie, boogie. We got the west, the wet west air pushing up, rising off of that side, and then the warm thermic and also the prevailing wind, southeast, pushing up this side. It's basically creating like this low pressure bubble right on the ridge. There's zero wind, air's not moving at all, even though 50 feet above me, these thermals are nuking and swirling around. So yeah, a little bit tricky situation here. Okay, you can't really launch in these technical steep spots without any wind. I could lay it out here and do some bullshit like run along that, but I really don't want to. Make yourself a pod. Whoa, look at those lakes like combining right there. That's insane. Wow. Alright. What are we putting down here? Straight in the lake. What you gonna do? What you gonna do? What you gonna do? When the valley wind comes for you. Out of the lake. I love paragliding, I love life, I love mountains, I love it all. Nice.
So then I put together one more little set of clips from Evans and Whitcomb, which are two fantastic mountains up the Rakaya River above the Bracken Snowfield. And this one proved to be a little bit more of a traditional just mountaineering day without using the wing.
Alrighty, headed up for Evans and Whitcomb. And it's going to be a big day. They're both very large mountains. They're both kind of far away. Decided to leave the wing behind. So we're just going freaking old school style with, you know, the running shoes and the 2-pound pack, super old school. Yeah, hopefully we can just bang them both out quick here. And by quick, I mean in less than 20 hours. Let's go! Up and over Whitcomb Pass. Yeah, sunrise. Beauty, beauty. Up onto the Sail Glacier. Headed towards the Bracken Snowfield and Mount Evans. Up and up. Cruising along. Gorgeous morning. Lovely glacier travel. Good freeze last night. Oh yeah. All the way back. Woo! That's gonna be a big one. Alright, almost 10 a.m. We're established here on the ridge. It actually is some pretty nice rock. And we're mostly in the lee, which is a real treat, because that wind is ripping on the glacier. Freaking bobbing and weaving. All these crazy bypassing traverses to pass these huge gendarmes. So it's still way up there somewhere. like 2 hours in, probably halfway up the route. Mega gnar. It's gonna be a really late night, or early morning maybe. 3 hours into the climb. Still gotta go way up there to the true summit. It's freaking burly one. On top of Evans. If I take 3 hours to go back down, and then a couple of hours to get over to Whitcomb, and then a couple more hours to climb Whitcomb, it's gonna be a late night. Late night. I can just fly to right there. It's gonna take me 5 hours to get to a spot that I can fly to in 2 minutes. We're going there. We're going to get up and down before it gets dark. Making it happen. Whew. Looks tough, but a little more manageable than the last one. Bit of a convoluted approach to get there. We're going way down this basin, way up this glacier, and then up. I've been out of water for several hours. But look at this. The mountains have provided the juice of life. Whole family in the top right there. There we go. Goodbye. Big old gnarly amphitheater here on the north side of Whitcomb. Not the kind of place you want to hang out for very long. Alrighty, 6 p.m., base of the route. Looks a little gnar, a little steep, but the rock actually looks okay, at least for this first bit. Pretty psyched that we grind up that glacier faster than I expected. Got a bit of gas left in the tank. So, yeah, we're just gonna give her the beans and see what we can do. Look at this. I think we should popularize the alpine finish. Intentionally staying out late and finishing in the dark. So you can be up high for evening golden hour. Oh yeah.
Can you go over to the lights over there?
Mega gnar ridge.
And see if you can find one that's just the stage.
Mega gnar ridge. Down, 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 down. Down, 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 down. Down, 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 down. Also, whoa, sick. 18 hours into the day. And post tolling, but still just cranking up this hill in an effort to catch the sunset up high. Oh yeah. Wow. Nothing over the coal. Pretty much all down from here. What do you even know about headlamp freaking roasted corn boot skiing? Down, 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 down. Crossing the same creek 100 times and boulder hopping for 5 miles down it. Alrighty. Tiny hut. Home sweet home. 23 hours after leaving.
So yeah, that was one of the longer, but also one of the better days of the whole project. It was very memorable. And yeah, so over the course of the summer, sort of combining those two styles of days, the climb and fly days with some more just foot travel days, I was able to complete my list of 100 peaks. And this is me just after landing off of my last flight from the footstool with my parents, Maren and Larry, who flew out from the US just to come and see me finish. And so yeah, it was 103 days, November 17th to February 27th. As an aside, I can't claim a formal finish of the 100 Peaks Challenge for 2 reasons. First, unbeknownst to me, there is a discrepancy between the high peak of Mount Ely de Beaumont and the west peak of Mount Ely de Beaumont. Don French clarified this to me several weeks after I'd climbed it. I went to the high summit and I neglected this honestly really aesthetic and technical traverse out to the west peak, which I hope to go back and do someday. The west peak is the one on the list. And also, there's specific verbiage in the description of the 100 Peaks Challenge written in 1991 that, quote, ascents must be made on foot. And there were several instances that I landed high even right near the summits of some of these peaks. So yeah, of those 103 days, 31 were rest days with no climbing. Due to a number of reasons. Of course, the weather, it was certainly better than average this summer, but I still did wait out some storms, including this particularly heinous one in the Tasman Saddle Hut, where I was alone in the hut for a couple days just listening to the walls shake. And then, of course, many long days of driving on the long, windy South Island roads. I spent 42 nights out in the backcountry over the course of the summer. Most of those were in the fantastic huts, which I really, really enjoyed. It's something that's a little bit unique to the New Zealand mountains, and definitely something I came to love was cozy nights in the alpine huts. And I had 4 nights that were open bivs underneath rocks. Over the course of the project, I covered 1,600 kilometers on foot, bike, kayak, general human-powered, so that doesn't include flying distance, and gained 145,000 vertical meters. I made 84 flights. 60 of those were from directly on top of or very near to summits of peaks. On 5 of those, I flew from the summit of one peak and landed at or quite near to the summit of another peak. The remainder of the flights were just short connecting flights. Occasionally I made even short flights to cross a river that was too deep to do on foot. And to wrap up, I'd just like to share sort of a hand-picked but non-cohesive selection of just particularly beautiful moments that I remember from the summer. This was a sunrise high on Mount Hooker.
Wow. There.
I had some great interactions with the local wildlife. This is a tar who didn't see me coming. I actually had to cut that clip short. We stared at each other for a full minute at least.
Look at him go. He's out.
And then, of course, my favorite inhabitants of the New Zealand mountains, the Kia.
Hello. You're a menace to society.
I was trying to communicate to learn how they fly so well. And then just a selection of stills. This is one of my favorite photos that I took. This was on the way up Mount Ward on maybe the least pleasant day of the project. It was very uncomfortable. I had sunburned my eyeballs quite severely in the days before due to a lost pair of sunglasses somewhere in a bush bash. And didn't realize how fantastic this photo was until looking at it afterwards, because at the time I couldn't even really see where I was going. But yeah, just this wonderful little creek sort of deep in the middle Landsborough on the west side of Mount Ward. Oh. This is looking back at my tracks, crossing one of the neves, coming back from Mount Spencer after a long day, climbing 2 peaks that I expected to take about 6 hours, and ended up taking about 14, do some route finding snafus. But yeah, I just loved sort of the vastness of that high alpine terrain. The south face of Douglas, taken on the way up Heidinger. This is Mount Irene, which is deep in the central Fiordlands. It's maybe the most remote peak on the list. Ended up being a 4-day trip with many kilometers of sea kayaking and many, many hours of bush bashing and some fantastic high alpine traversing through the Murchisons to get out there. Yeah, one of the most beautiful and unique areas in New Zealand as well. This is the eastern escarpment of the high peaks from Mount Tasman and north. I took this photo at the end of an 11-day link-up, sort of traveling through these high peaks, which I actually specifically modeled sort of my order of traversing after Alistair's project, which I definitely appreciate the guidance there. And yeah, I knew going into it with my planning that this would be sort of the technical and logistical crux, doing this set of peaks all in one push. And so yeah, this is on my way up Mount Chudley, the last peak of this group, which I then flew off of out to the Tasman Road. And yeah, that was a definite turning point in the project when I flew out from there. It was less than halfway through, but that was sort of the moment that I had a realization that like maybe it would actually be possible to complete the whole thing. And to finish, this is a compilation of clips from maybe my single favorite day of the entire project. It was just a purely fun and engaging but really enjoyable day on Mount Totoko in the Derrins.
Thank you to Tokyo, and thank you New Zealand. Oh, what?
To wrap up, I need to thank some people who made this possible. First and foremost, my family, for always supporting me and loving me unconditionally despite all of my crazy ideas. My girlfriend and partner, Sid, who's here in the audience, she came up for the last few weeks of the project and helped me out with some of the long drives around the North Island, which was very much appreciated. And then I received grants from a few folks, the American Alpine Club, the Dirtbag Fund, and Path Projects. All right, thank you all for coming, and I'd like to open it up for some questions. So yeah, you might have noticed I had a red wing and a blue wing. They're quite different. So the red one is a single skin wing. It weighs less than a kilogram. It's 16 square meters, and so obviously it's about as light and compact of a wing as you can get. With those weight savings, you sacrifice some performance, so it doesn't fly very quickly, and it's not very dynamic. So it's quite good for climbing technical routes when weight and pack space is a premium. But once you're in the air, it's best for kind of just flying in a straight line to wherever you want to go. The other wing, the blue one, is a Nova Bantam. It's a 12-meter wing, so quite a bit smaller. It's more like a speed wing, and so it flies quite a bit faster. It's more dynamic. And so that's the one that I was flying close to the terrain and doing all those steep turns. And so it's better for launching in high wind because of its higher speed. And then for anything where I'm flying terrain and doing these more dynamic flights, I'd be on that wing. Yes?
Yeah, amazing photography and videography. Like, it's so cool that we get to experience what we did, some taste of it.
Thanks.
Really enjoyed that. I'm a hang glider pilot by kind of what I've done. Paragliding was amazing. When you did all those flights, did you know you were going to land, or was it completely dynamic that you were just, ad hoc landing in a flat area?
Yeah, so it was kind of halfway between the two. I spent many, many hours just sort of poring over satellite imagery. And so for any given peak, I would kind of pick several options of where I could fly to. So I'd pick like my worst case scenario, like bailout option that's close to the peak that I know that I can get to for sure. And then I would go and pick out further and further options because yeah, the area is quite dynamic, especially if I was flying later in the day. And in some of these deep valleys, you often get quite strong winds, and it can be difficult to forecast those. And so, yeah, I never knew exactly how far I was going to be able to get. And sometimes I would end up landing much shorter than I expected, and other times I'd be able to glide much further than expected. So yeah, I would always pick out several options, including one that was like my worst case, like I get terrible glide and fly straight down. Yeah.
Any downwind landings?
Several, yes, and a couple of downwind landings, like into river rocks, that were a little bit frightening and uncomfortable. Yep. Yep.
Have you thought of a four-wheel drive fan for your mixed trip?
Ooh, good question. There's something actually really fun about slogging up these really long valleys. It's more of a complete experience, I think, when you spend an entire day walking into the mountains to begin with. That being said, I did have a couple instances where I had been walking all day and then got passed by a big truck full of, hunters going into whatever, and was a bit jealous. So maybe. It depends on how sporty I'm feeling my next time here. Yeah.
How do you find New Zealand food compared to what you get in America? Do you have any staple favorites that you're going to take a stash at?
I love mince and cheese pies so much. We don't have gas station pies in America, and I don't know how I'm going to be able to go back and survive without them. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you take 2 attempts on any of the peaks?
No, not once I had started climbing them. I had most notably 2 peaks, Hooker and Deccan, which I had intended to do as part of a link up from the Hopkins Valley, which was the link up that I lost my sunglasses on, which I had sort of camped at the base of in the Landsborough and ended up foregoing them because I needed to get out and recover, and then ended up approaching them on a separate trip from the West Coast. And there were also a couple instances, notably Barnacote and Alba both come to mind, where I started up one route on a peak, and then that wasn't working, and I went back down and climbed another route the same day. But once I started climbing a peak, I didn't have any situations where I bailed and came back another day. Sid.
What harnesses did you use and why?
Ooh. So I mostly use a harness which is called an Ozone F-Lite, which weighs about 100 grams. But I had a second harness, which I used on a couple flights, which is a little bit heavier, but my mom sewed these fantastic denim patches onto the butt, and so we nicknamed it the Jarness. And it's a fun little bit of my mom's handiwork to take with me. Yeah.
I noticed you often flew with no gloves on, and it looked very delicate, the operation. Can you fly with heavy gloves?
You can. Generally, I prefer not to when I'm doing this style of flying. Most of my flights were less than 10 minutes. And yeah, generally I prefer to have the better dexterity at the sacrifice of my hands getting a little bit cold in the air. When you're doing more traditional cross-country paragliding and you're flying for potentially hours at a time, you absolutely do fly with gloves on. Yep. Yeah.
Can you explain your shoe choice to us, please?
Oh, good question. So the shoes I'm wearing actually right now came on a lot of the peaks with me. You can see the tread hasn't fared too well. But yeah, so I wore sort of more traditional technical ice climbing boots on that Mount Cook area link up and a couple of the other early season objectives, and then also on the last day on the north ridge of Mount Sefton. But other than that, I did pretty much everything else in just traditional trail running shoes. A couple of reasons for that. First of all, they're quite light and they dry out quickly and they're breathable. I find that I enjoy them much more for scrambling on moderately technical rock than any approach shoes or rock shoes. And when paired with like stretch-on microspikes, I've found that they work, like super well enough. They're not great for steep snow, but you can kind of make it work. Particularly if you have two technical ice tools, which I brought with me on pretty much every peak. I had two lightweight Petzl goalies. So yeah, the trail runners are just they're light, they're comfortable, and yeah, it's just what works for me.
Do you wear front crampons for any of those peaks, or always microspikes?
Whenever I had the trail runners on, yeah, I only used microspikes. Yeah, I've never liked the feeling of the strap-on, cramp-on interface. They never feel like quite secure enough. And so anything that I felt like I really needed it, I ended up wearing the ice boots for. Yeah.
Did you, when you climbed all these peaks, did you ever use a rope, or did you always trust that you were going to solo it and then down climb it, no rappelling or pitching at all?
So I did use a rappel line for, again, that sort of central high peaks link up. And I rappelled maybe 10 total pitches. I think the most continuous rappelling that I did was off of Mount Hicks down the Curtin route and off of Mount Drake to the col in between Drake and Magellan. Other than that, I didn't bring the rappel line on anything else and did a lot of down climbing or flying off. Yep.
So what's your next big trip?
Ooh, good question. The first big thing on my radar is heading back to the US and working my summer guiding season. I work as a trail running guide, which I absolutely love. And so that's kind of my main focus right now. I have some other ideas that I'm scheming with Climb and Fly projects, but they're all quite in the early stages. Yep. Yeah.
Which was the worst mountain you went up?
Ooh. If you're talking about like pure like climbing and rock quality type of thing, Mount Rudolph comes to mind. It's a little bit of an obscurity just east of the minarets, and it's terrible. The route is given grade, I think, 1+ in the guidebook, which is pretty laughable. It was just like horrifyingly sketchy and really loose rock. Yep. Yep.
What's your overall view of New Zealand rock?
Engaging.
Would you mind talking more about that story about when your lines broke?
Ooh.
Just maybe give some people the background.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite a long story. I'll speak to it briefly. I'll preface it by saying I did recently release a podcast. It's called, with a show called The Club.
Like that. Para-alpinism, I think, is this sort of new sport in New Zealand. Only a few have adopted it and flying off peaks and sea. There's only a few that I know, so amazing that you managed to do that. But what I think I took away from Nathan's talk is just pure love of being in the mountains, and I think that's what enabled him to just keep going out there. It wasn't for the prize, for the 100 peaks. I think that was just the motivation to start, right? And so we've got you a little present, and with this. Yeah.
It's wrapped up in a canvas chair bag. We thought it would be appropriate to give Nathan the Canterbury Mountaineer of the Year award. It's an amazing achievement.
Thank you.